What's up, everybody? This is the Strange Land Podcast. My name is Kenny. I'm here with my good friend Stefan. How you doing tonight, Stefan?
Doing good, doing good. How are you?
Doing pretty good, man. We're on episode 17. And before we get started, I just want to thank everyone who's been downloading, man. Our download numbers have been going up recently, and it's really dope. So thank you for downloading very much.
We're getting views and downloads from all over the world, so we appreciate it. We're feeling the love right about now.
Yeah, and if you guys want to send us an email with any suggestions, any cases you want us to cover, or just anything you want, just send us an email to thestrangelandpodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's thestrangelandpodcast@gmail.com. Visit our website, which is strangelandpod.com. And let's get on with today's episode. What are we talking about today, Stefan?
So today's episode, I've been pretty excited for this. So today we're going to talk about one of the youngest serial killers in America. He was operating around the Allentown area of Pennsylvania. Harvey Miguel Robinson.
How far away is that from where you grew up?
It's about 50 miles north, I would say.
So this is pretty much in the area.
Yeah,
I mean, relatively.
Definitely,
in the area.
definitely. I mean, the people I know, like my family and stuff up there, they for sure know about this guy.
Okay.
I was unaware of him, however.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. So Robinson would go on a spree of burglaries, murders, and rapes over a very short span of time. I think it was 2 years, from 93 to 95. So 2 years he was arrested. But the brutalities of his murders are what really make this case interesting, and a little bit of his family dynamics also.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one for family because it's really weird. You know, a lot of times we kind of get into basically almost every case, I would say, if we can, we talk about the mother and father, how the person's childhood,
Right.
and how maybe it affected, what they would end up doing later in their life. And this one's more so that than I think any other case we've done.
Yeah, even last week, we sort of gave a shout out to Father's Day, but I think this one actually even speaks more to the theme of that, really.
Yeah, definitely.
So before we even begin to talk about the murders, I think it's best to start almost 40 years before the murders took place. And it really starts all here with Harvey Miguel Robinson's father. Now, his name was Harvey Rodriguez Robinson, so it may kind of get weird here with the names.
Yeah, technically they weren't senior and junior, I don't believe, because they had different middle names. But we might just call them, Harvey Sr. and Harvey Jr., because we're going to be talking a lot about the father in this case as well as the son.
Yeah, definitely. And how they relate to each other.
Yeah, exactly.
So Harvey Sr. was a jazz musician in York, Pennsylvania, and this guy was sort of a drunk, violent character. I mean, he was sort of known for beating and torturing his wives and mistresses alike. He was all over the place,
which is
really.
something we see a lot.
Totally.
Obviously we see, abusive parents in a lot of these cases. It kind of just comes with the territory.
Yeah, we've definitely talked in more than one episode about, having abusive father. It's all, at this point, it's sort of a meme now. It's sort of something that just reoccurs. So our story starts in 1963. Harvey Rodriguez Robinson Sr. was convicted of a voluntary manslaughter after beating his 27-year-old mistress to death. Now, her name was Marlene Perez, and she was basically beat to death with a blunt object in the head. Now, when police find the body, she's actually on her couch, naked, covered in blood, and she's not even recognizable. I mean, this guy destroyed her face. So brutal, man.
Yeah, and it really seems like this was just a fit of rage, though. I mean, I don't know how much it built to this, but Harvey Sr. really, it seems like he just had a lot of rage that he kind of kept in, and then it just sort of all came out in one day. And so you kind of see this in the brute force behind this murder.
So, in being as brutal as he was, he didn't even own up to the crime at first. In statements to police, Robinson Sr. said that he went to the York woman's apartment and basically found it locked. And him and another friend had broken into the apartment and then they found her. So the man who was with him when questioned by police gives a completely different story, and he pretty much fesses up to it. He says that he saw Robinson Sr. strike Perez in the head and knock her on the floor, basically where he just kicks her in the face. I
Yeah,
mean, this
so
guy's a classic abuser.
yeah, so even when she goes down on the floor, he continues to beat her until, like you said, she was completely unrecognizable by police. I mean, he went crazy on her, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something I want the audience to keep in mind the entire time while listening, because as we start to describe the murders that happened by his son, you really start to see a correlation here that's pretty creepy.
Oh yeah, of course. And so Robinson Sr. was sentenced to 6 to 12 years in state prison. And when he was sentenced, a York newspaper claims that he appeared to fight back tears and he professed his innocence. And so, yeah, he was pretty lucky to get off with voluntary manslaughter. The district attorney had sought a first degree murder conviction. And he said that Robinson showed specific intent to kill and malice toward the victim when he stomped her with his foot. And you know the thing is like if he had been convicted of first degree murder, you know he would have probably gotten much longer than 6 to 12 years.
Oh yeah.
And if he had been in prison, let's say that they had given him, who knows, 20 plus years, Robinson Jr. may have never been born.
So after Robinson Sr. is released from prison, 3 years after he's released, he meets a woman named Barbara Brown, who's actually 20 years his junior. And they hit it off, and they have a child named Harvey Miguel Robinson. Now, Miguel Robinson was born on December 6, 1974. And at first, you know, from what I can tell, he had a decent childhood. You know, he wasn't a bad baby or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like, you know, in the beginning, everything was going, you know, fine. Everything was going well. But eventually, Harvey Sr.'s drunken and violent behavior would force Barbara to leave him just 2.5 years after he was born. And she stated that, you know, she didn't want her child growing up in a bad environment, so she left.
I don't blame her.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, you know, Harvey Sr.'s been in prison for killing someone. You know, he was in prison and out just for killing his mistress. I mean,
And this wasn't a secret. I mean, Barbara knew about this.
yeah, exactly. And then so once he starts showing those signs of this violent and drunken behavior, you know, she decides to dip out of there.
Definitely. So, though Barbara and Harvey Jr. live in Allentown, PA, away from their abusive captor, I'll say, every 2 weeks, Harvey Sr. would be able to pick up his his kid and have him for the weekend and spend some time with his son. Now, it's noted by Harvey Jr.'s mother that every time he came back from these little staycations with his dad, he always came back with a terrible attitude, and he wouldn't listen to her. He was sort of, you know, I mean, he had a problem with authority, but this sort of personality began to emerge after spending some time with his father.
Yeah, and that makes sense. You know, if you're spending time between both parents' houses, you know, you're going to get a bit of each.
Definitely.
You're going to see their personalities, and especially with I would say, a young son, with a young boy, he really mimics things that that his father does. I was just saying this on this last Father's Day. I was telling my dad that that I do a lot. Like, I see every day, I'm 27 years old, I see every day all of his little things that he does come out in myself.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, this little child is, you know, mimicking, and he's starting to act out based on what he sees his father.
His mom also noted that his father let him do whatever he wanted. There was like no rules. Whenever he went to his dad's house, it was fair game. So she actually reported on one occasion Harvey Jr. had thrown a can of soda out of the car when they were driving. And after his mother sort of yelled at him and asked him, "Why did you do that?" he just replied with, "Dad throws his beer cans out of the window." So not only is he just modeling bad behavior, he's like drinking with his kid in the car.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something that a young child should see, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds like a great guy.
So, other than his periodic fits of rage, people around Harvey Jr. described him as like we said before, a fairly normal kid in his early years. But as he grew up, people noticed that Harvey began to have a terrible temper. And as early as first grade, Harvey began fighting at school. And the first time he was actually charged as a juvenile, he was only 9 years old. And early in his teens, he would also begin taking drugs and drinking quite often.
Yeah, and I mean, you see this with bad kids, quote unquote. They start to resent authority from an early age. There's a story from when Harvey was 14. His teacher even asked to have a a social worker sit in on the class because she had felt worried about something that Harvey had said to her, and I guess he was just modeling this behavior he was mirroring from his dad. And anyway, so after she gets a social worker to come in and sit, now let me add as well, the teacher was pregnant with twins, so she was even more worried. Just being in the classroom with him. But eventually, Harvey actually gets into a fight with the social worker, and they have an altercation. He punches him. He's throwing swings at this guy.
Yeah. And so, real quick, Stefan, you're from Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Do you know of Allentown?
I do. I've heard of it. Yep.
Do you know anything about Allentown?
No, not really.
I'm just curious how. I don't really know if what the city was like. If the city could sort of have taken hold of how his personality would have been as well, on top of everything else. Sometimes you'll see that
Right.
if someone lives in a certain area, they're obviously going to see and do and act certain ways.
Right. So I'm not as familiar with Allentown. The way, when I think of it in my mind, I think of this sort of, all around, all American type of city. Not a big, bustling type of place, but, a place that has small businesses and does just fine on its own. A quiet place,
Yeah.
Now, I do know, I have been to York, Pennsylvania. I actually have a couple cousins that live there, and that is not the greatest place to be, I've heard, but that's sort of besides the fact.
Yeah. So Harvey, he was known to be a very good athlete, and he was in several extracurricular activities, which included wrestling, which he would hopefully he would get some pent up energy out.
Yeah.
And he would work in the administration office at his school, and he was pretty smart. He supposedly had an IQ of 117.
This is hard to believe, honestly. I mean,
I don't know, man. You hear, for one thing, I should just say I don't really take IQs very seriously at
Yeah.
all. I mean, you hear just a bunch of crap, especially with serial killers
Sure.
and murderers and that sort of thing. You always hear people say, "Well, that guy, he was really
They're
smart.
all
They're all geniuses. He had an
Yeah.
IQ of 167." And it's like I don't really know how well or how much. I can trust
Right.
any of that. So who knows? But supposedly his IQ was 117. And he would, he did have a lot of friends in school, and he had he did have a girlfriend at the time of the murders.
Yeah, I find that even crazier. We have this conversation a lot too, compartmentalizing. This guy was living a couple different lives.
Yeah, definitely, and it's pretty interesting to think. He's 17 when he starts this, right? And it's interesting to think about. Like, just remember when you were 17 and you were in high school and you had friends and you'd go out and you'd party some.
Sure.
You might even
A
drink.
lot.
Yeah, right. You might even drink a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's just weird to think about the fact that he's out doing all of this, and at the same time he's thinking about killing people. He's thinking about committing rapes, and it's just interesting if you stop and think about what that's like for a 17-year-old boy.
Yeah, I was going to say, and somehow he's able to balance it, but he really doesn't balance this very well. I think it was a constant struggle for him to try and keep everything normal and stay calm, really.
Definitely.
So now that we've sort of talked about Harvey's childhood and what set him on this path, I think it's best we sort of get into the murders here. Before I even start, though, I want to give the 3 victims that were actually murdered. Harvey Robinson affected a lot of people's lives, but these are the 3 people that actually lost their lives due to his acts. So, our first victim was Joan Burkhart. She was basically a 29-year-old nurse's aide. Charlotte Schmoyer, who was a 15-year-old newspaper carrier, and Jessica Jean Forney, who was a 47-year-old grandmother. So, I mean, these are all different ages of people, who had felt the wrath of Harvey.
Yeah, really, they're 3 completely different ages. I'm not so it doesn't really it doesn't. Who knows if he has a real MO, and who knows
Yeah.
if he really seeks out a particular victim. But it's probably like most of the people that we talk about, or most murderers. They kind of look for someone who's either weak or just in a weakened state, maybe. But who knows? It's kind of hard to tell with these 3.
Yeah, I think Harvey was a stalker. It seems to me that he would basically look at a place and scope it out for a couple days, figure out the patterns like most people who burglarize do.
BTK.
And yeah, exactly. It's sort of that. He was just a lot less careless, which we'll talk about.
Definitely.
So the first murder Harvey Robinson would commit was in 1993 when he spotted Joan Burkhart through her window while she was changing. At this time, like you said, Kenny, Harvey was just 17 years old. Joan was said to have been a shy and loving girl who loved spending time playing sports and listening to music. So, on the night of August 5th, 1993, Robinson actually broke into her house. We were just talking about this. And he breaks in with the intention of burglarizing, obviously, and he takes $50 from the dresser. And, I think he just spends some time sort of hanging around her apartment, getting used to the surroundings. Joan actually notes, because she calls the police after this, obviously, but she notes a fan that she knew was on when she had left was off when she got there. So 4 days later, authorities had been called by a neighbor who was worried that they hadn't heard from Burkhart after they tried knocking on the door over the weekend. And they also noticed that, her stereo inside, it's not clear if it was the TV or a radio itself, but, there's loud blaring noise coming from inside.
Yeah, so the neighbors noticed that, nothing has kind of changed in the house, and it's like
Right.
she's listening to the same thing for many days, and so they also note that the screen from the window was missing during this entire time. So it's like the screen was taken off and then it was missing, and that can be a very clear sign of a burglary.
Yeah, I mean, that's a little weird. I think if my neighbor was blaring music for 3 days, that would kind of set me off too. I don't know if I'd go over there and say something, but I'd be like, what the hell,
Something. I mean, you should probably just
Yeah,
in case, like in this
exactly.
position. And it was like John List, right? But like a month,
Right.
music was playing, lights were on, for an entire month, basically, he just left the house as it was, and people started to notice eventually.
Right.
And so the neighbors called the police, and when they entered the apartment, they come across a very gruesome scene.
Yeah, when they walk in, there's blood splatter everywhere around the apartment. On the walls, on the couch, all over the carpet, tracked throughout the house. I mean, this place is destroyed.
Yeah, and Joan's laying dead in her living room on her couch, and she was partially clothed, and her shorts were ripped and pulled up. And there's definitely signs of struggles. I mean, there's bruising on her hands, which shows she's probably trying to fight back, and just the fact that her shorts were ripped and torn and either pulled up or pulled down or whatever, they're messed up, shows that he was trying.
Yeah, it gives you a good idea of what had taken place.
Yeah, exactly. And after searching the house, the police find semen samples and blood samples from black shirts that were found in her room, and one piece of clothing that authorities believed to have actually wiped off the murder weapon.
Yeah, they could tell by the way the blood was spread out across the shirt that it had been basically used to wipe the murder weapon. Whatever it was, they never found. They hypothesized it was like a piece of furniture or a blunt object.
Yeah, something
basically.
just to beat her to death with.
Right. I guess it's worth to note also neighbors claim, a couple days before the cops were called, they heard screaming and banging happening in the house. Now, again, that's pretty suspect, but how many people, hear stuff like that all the time and don't say anything?
Yeah, a lot of people just don't want to get involved, and I don't know if it would have saved her in this particular situation, but it
Right.
it may have caught him sooner.
Yeah.
And this was his first murder, so it could have saved two people. But a lot of times it's not. Who are we? We can't judge people like that. You don't know what you don't know what's going through their mind. But sometimes it's best to get involved.
Yeah. So after the autopsy is done on Joan, they basically theorized that she had been bludgeoned over the head at least 30 times and rape. The wounds were so severe that the pathologists find the hair from her head embedded in the fractures of her skull. I mean, that's how badly she was beaten in the face.
I mean, her hair is just stuck into her skull. I mean,
Exactly.
Yeah, and again, I don't know if they would have been able to recognize her immediately, but it was a pretty bad beating, and we can sort of go back to his father,
Mm-hmm.
and what. And did you read anything about if Harvey Jr. knew about his dad's murder?
Yeah, this is the interesting thing. So Harvey definitely knew about his dad's activities before he was born, and family members will even say that Harvey, he idolized his father. He loved his dad.
Yeah, which and so I'm sure that he's taking some notes from him in this particular.
Yeah, I think a
instance.
little bit too much of his father would probably rubbed off on him.
Definitely.
So, police are rushing to try and find the suspect for this murder, but actually, little do they know, Robinson was actually already in jail for totally separate charges during this time. And 8 months later, he gets out of jail and then just continues to burglarize houses and leaving terror in his path. At this time, there's been a murder in Allentown. People are getting their house burglarized. So some alarms at this time were actually set off.
Yeah. Do you know what his other charges were? Were they just drug related charges?
I think they were. I don't think they were drugs. I think they were just like fighting and like violent altercations that happened.
Yeah,
But there was quite a few of them, honestly. I'm sure he did have some drug charges.
Yeah. So in June of '93, police received a call from the offices of the Morning Call, which was a local newspaper. And they explained that they were contacted by one of Charlotte Schmoyer's regular newspaper customers. And remember that she was a newspaper, what was it, like a carrier?
Yeah, she basically rode her bike around with a cart and dropped off everyone's newspaper.
Exactly. So they noticed that her cart and her bike were outside of another person's front window. And so it's just sitting there kind of way out of place. Like, why would this, car and bike be sitting there?
Right, and this is really weird because everyone knows that Charlotte Schmoyer is on time. She's known for being very punctual, and they always count on her from day to day. So it's her routine.
Exactly, and that's why the police are, or at least that's why, they were called, because this is odd. This is not like her. And so the police recover her radio headset between two houses, and along with enough finger streaks on the window panes of a nearby garage to hint at a struggle. And police conclude that she had been abducted.
Yeah, so this pretty much sets them off. After police find her headset in between the houses, they get together a search party. And basically, it doesn't take long for everyone to get together, and they find this trail of blood, and they follow it. And it's a trail of blood, and, once they go along, they'll find a shoe, and then soon enough, they're actually led to a heavily wooded area where they find Charlotte's body haphazardly stacked underneath a pile of logs.
Which is so weird, man. This is really weird. It's like, obviously she was doing her daily job, her regular routine. She was just delivering papers on her bike, and I mean, this is not really. I don't know if he was stalking her beforehand. Maybe he had seen her a couple days before and sort of found out her route. For the newspaper. But it's so strange that he does this. I mean, sort of just out and about, takes her back, puts
in a
her
small town where everyone knows everyone.
Yeah, this is not done very well.
Not at all.
It's like, BTK. He was started. It's sort of like him. He lost control of a lot of his. He tried really hard. BTK really tried hard to try to get away with it and to try to make it very clean, and he would always end up fucking it up.
Right.
And this is kind of like that, man. He didn't really try very hard to hide her or do anything like that.
No, or to hide any of the evidence. You could tell that these murders were super impulsive.
Yeah, and so, she was stabbed 20 times. 20 times in the back and chest. And so that's different. The last girl, he beat her to death.
Right.
And so now he has a knife and he's stabbing her. And she's found partially nude. Her sweatshirt's pulled up and her pants are pulled down, which is another sign of rape, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
They also find a huge gash on her throat that had been slit, and I think they even say in the medical reports that it was sort of like an overkill sort of cut. And at least 7 of the stab wounds she had were lethal enough to have killed her.
Yeah, I mean, she has 20 stab wounds. Like you said, 7 of them could have killed her. There's no need for the cut throat, but he did it anyways.
Right.
So I think that shows a lot about his, about exactly what he's trying to do. It's not like, I don't know, he's not just trying to rape. He's not just trying to burglarize. He wants to kill, and I think he's getting great satisfaction over the type of killing that he's doing.
Oh, definitely. So they also find cuts and scrapes all over her, basically showing signs of a major struggle. She has some bruising, and one of the most significant pieces of evidence that they find is a boot print is actually left on her face, and it's raised so far that they can actually identify what shoe it was. So, with that being said, we talked about earlier his dad had stomped and beaten his mistress in the face, and here we go with Harvey Jr. actually doing almost the exact same thing.
Yeah, I mean, she was stabbed to death, like we said, but he's also beating her. He's also kicking her.
Sure.
And so he definitely has, he enjoys beating, definitely. And police find pubic hair on the body and begin to stack some of the evidence and get a profile for the killer. So they're going to try, I think at this point maybe they might have connected the 2 murders.
Sure.
Maybe not. Either way, they're definitely trying to get a profile, because like you said, this is a small town. I mean, how many people are going around this town and just killing?
Right.
And semen is also found after the autopsy is done.
Yeah, I mean, this guy's leaving all sorts of DNA behind, hair, semen, all sorts of stuff. And I believe they find blood on her as well. That's not hers. So early on in June, which is the same month Robinson had killed Charlotte Schmoyer, he actually decides to break into the house of John and Denise Samcali. Now, at this time, the couple is actually on vacation, so they're not there. But when the couple gets home, they realize that their whiskey had been taken, and they're also missing guns from their house. I think a handgun, a .38 handgun, was missing from the house. So they're definitely freaked out. I'm sure they're aware of the murders that had been taken place, and now their house is burglarized.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with burglaries too. It's like they're noticing burglaries as well as the murders.
Right.
And so they're definitely freaked out. It's really weird to come home from vacation and just notice things are missing. It must be really freaky because you don't know if someone's still in the house. So they have to go through the house and check and make sure that no one's still there.
Yeah, exactly. And to know that your gun is somewhere not with you that could be used to, commit a crime is pretty scary as well. But regardless, now he had broken into the house, but he comes back. Now at this time, Denise Sam Kelly, her husband, was on a business trip, so he's not at the house at this time. Harvey had been staking out the house. So eventually he enters the house wielding a knife, and he begins to basically sneak around the house. Denise had heard a noise coming from a nearby closet so loud that it basically woke her up. And after she wakes up, she's sent into a panic and she tries to run to make it out of the house. And she's actually met by Robinson, who grabs her and tries to, subdue her basically. But she's able to break free and make a run for it. And now we talked about him being an athlete. He catches up to her, but at this point they're in the front yard, almost sort of near the sidewalk. So he basically pins her down, flips her on her back, pinning her down with his knees, and then begins to rape her. Mind you, this is outside of her house. His hands are over her mouth. He's trying to get her to be quiet, but this is out in the street essentially.
Yeah, and this, this can't go on forever. And I think he knows this. He knows that they can't sit out in front of this house and fight. And, he trying to rape her this entire time and then kill her and everything.
Right.
So Denise actually bites Robinson on the inside of his upper left arm and fights him again the entire time. And Harvey escapes through the back of Denise's house.
Yeah, so what actually gets Harvey to get off of her is, I guess she made enough noise and a neighbor was able to flick on their lights, and this basically freaked him out so much he was out.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's no way you can just be outside doing all of this and just get away with it.
Right.
And whether he came to this conclusion or if he just got scared from the light, who knows? But yeah, he definitely made an escape.
Yeah, he somehow he's able to basically get away, and Denise is beaten terribly. He was so brutal, and in a lot of these crimes, this guy's using his bare hands to commit murders, and he's basically just forcing himself on these women.
Yeah, and how he broke into their house while they were on vacation, and like you said, it seems like he stalked the house because maybe somehow there's some evidence in the house that he noticed and that he saw that, he could tell who lived there.
I'm sure he was going through their drawers and all sorts of stuff.
Exactly.
Man.
Maybe there's a picture of the couple and they were, so he saw, so he kind of stayed back after they came home from vacation, just watched, waited for him to go on a trip or do something like that. And then he made back in, not to burglarize, but to actually kill.
Right. So after the police are called, they show up at the Sam Kelly residence, and after doing a thorough search of the house, they actually find the knife Harvey had been wielding right in front of the bathroom. So I think he had the full intention of going there and killing her, I mean, that's pretty obvious.
Yeah, definitely. And so Harvey's third murder was 47-year-old grandmother. Her name was Jessica Jean Forney. And Forney was strangled and beaten as well as sexually assaulted, and while the rest of her family slept right upstairs. And on July 14th, she was found dead in her Allentown home with partially nude and severely beaten. And so a very similar MO as his previous victims.
Right.
I'm sure the third, this last Denise, the one that escaped, luckily that escaped. I'm sure her escaping only pissed him off even more.
Oh, for sure.
So now he's out searching for houses, just like Richard Ramirez, right, and trying to find someone.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's worth to note here that Jessica Jean Forney was found by her family. I mean, her family goes in, and it's reported that her granddaughter even saw this happen.
Yeah, I mean, her entire family's home, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And the granddaughter is actually able to give a description of the killer as well, which I thought was interesting. So the crime scene is pretty similar to the other homicides that happened. I mean, there's blood splatter everywhere. Again, the screen is missing from the window. Jessica's face is swollen, misshapen, and there was so much dried blood all over her face. It looked black, essentially.
And this is, the screen missing. It's like you can just take a screen out and just see if a window's unlocked. You don't even have to make a lot of noise. It's like with this, her family was sleeping upstairs, which means that, he didn't have to, obviously he didn't make a lot of noise because it didn't really wake anyone up, right?
Right.
I mean, maybe it woke someone up, but
It said that there were pretty large fans in the house that were loud and you couldn't really hear a lot, because I wondered this myself. How do you not know? Especially in the way that Harvey killed people.
Yeah.
It wasn't a quick death.
yeah, and she's not even that old. I mean, we said grandmother, but she's only 47.
She's 47.
Yeah, so it's not like she's 60 or 70 and not making that much noise, but, I guess sometimes it just works out that way, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Something is, like you said, the fans, something is masking the noise of the murder, unfortunately.
Yeah, and people are sleeping,
Yeah, in the autopsy, it finds 50 different injuries. And they say, the pathologist says that the injuries are consistent with being beaten with fists. And the cause of death determined was basically strangulation and blunt force trauma, which, is again part of his whole deal. It's kind of what he does.
He beat her to death with his bare hands.
Exactly, yeah.
It's just insane. During the autopsy, they theorized the attacker was wearing a ring. They can tell that by some of the markings that were left on her that, whoever did this was wearing a ring. And it's theorized the same thing happened with Jessica Jean Forney that happened with Denise Samcali, that he basically pinned her down with his knees and then just beat her face in.
And of course, she was also raped, and semen was collected from the scene. And so now we have, semen basically being collected from every scene that he's left at.
Right.
And so they should be able to sort of figure out that, okay, this is at least the same person, even if they don't know exactly who it is.
Yeah, this guy's careless at this point. He's
Yeah.
just trying to get away with it.
Another hint towards his, quote unquote high IQ,
Right.
117 IQ, but he's just going in super carelessly and just beating and raping and doing whatever. I mean, maybe his lust for this sort of thing is so strong that he can't control it.
Mm-hmm.
That could be a contributing factor, of course. I'm sure it is.
Right.
But his IQ is not showing. It's not shining very bright right now.
Well, and he may have been the type of guy that was just book smart. You know what I mean? We've all met the person who is strictly book smart but has no common sense. He truly wasn't a true crime fan, that's for sure. He had learned nothing as far as like trying to get away with murders or anything like that.
Yeah.
But so days later, after the death of Jessica Jean Forney, again at the Sam Cali residence, there's a break-in, or an attempted break-in. Now, since the first altercation with Denise, the family installs an alarm system in the house. So Jessica is woken up, or I'm sorry, Denise is woken up again by someone trying to get through their back door, and it sets off the alarm.
So he tries to go back. So this is the third time that we know of that he's been at the Denise house, the Sam Cali house, I guess. It's like he's trying to go back again. I mean,
She's the one that got away.
She's the one that got away. He tried to rape and murder her in her front yard, basically, right?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so it's like, why would you ever go back a third time to try to finish the job?
Right. Well, we see this a lot too with especially with people like the Green River. Like this guy was going back to the crime scene all the time.
Yeah, and it seems like he's trying to, because he tries to break back into the house, and police are stationed outside the house, of course.
Right.
And because they're trying to figure out who is doing this, and like you said, with the Green River Killer, with a lot of other criminals, they go back to the scene of the crime, and this is exactly what he did.
It's worth to mention here that after these attacks were happening, they can tell it's targeted at Denise Sam Calley, right? They know something's going on there. They may not know why, but they know that something is happening. So police basically use her as bait to try and capture this guy. They're just hoping and praying he tries to come back to the crime scene.
Yeah, and it might not be for any particular reason either. Like, there might, I mean, it's not like he knew her, right?
Sure.
I mean, maybe he had seen her around. Maybe he had seen her shopping or doing whatever just by coincidence.
I'm sure he did, yeah.
Yeah, but it's, like you said, it's a small town. But the only real connection between the two is, like we said, she got away, and he probably has some type of, sexual connection with her or not with her, but for her rather,
Right.
where he has to have her now. So that's what the police are trying to do. I mean, obviously, the third time he comes back, so they know, or at least they assume, that he has something for her, for sure.
Right. Police actually, not only are they stationed, in unmarked cars watching the house, there's also a policeman inside who is basically protecting the family. Now, at this point, they're leaving windows unlocked. They're trying anything they can to get this guy to come back so they can catch him.
Yeah, and by the way, it was basically the third time that he tried to break into the house. The cops weren't stationed, but the alarm was set. And so what happened was he tried to break into the Sam Calley house, and the alarm went off, and he was able to run and get away. And after the third time, when the alarm went off, then they started keeping cops stationed outside the house because they, like we said before, they realized that he was going to come back probably.
Right. So 3 days after that attempt to break into the Sam Calley house, Robinson broke into another house of a woman with the intention of raping and killing her. So again, this guy's doing the same thing. He's trying to, 3 days later, the gall of this guy. But anyway, so he tries to break in. However, when he does make it into the house, he basically peers in the woman of this bedroom and he sees that she's sleeping with her boyfriend. So he then decides to go to the next room where he finds this woman's 5-year-old daughter sleeping. Now, Robinson takes this 5-year-old girl downstairs. He puts her face down in a laundry basket and then rapes and strangles the child. Now, yeah, and that may be hard for some of our viewers, but I think it's important to really display the terrible actions of this guy. I mean, he was a monster.
Everything was taken to a new level at this point. He raped and tried to kill a 5-year-old. And so you kind of see what this person or who this person really is. He's not, as bad as it is to break into houses and obviously not give a shit about anything and rape women and kill them and attempt to rape and attempt to kill, he has now done that to a 5-year-old girl.
Right. And, the girl actually manages to survive this attack somehow. It's not clear how long she was strangled, but
more than likely I would say that he strangled her, right? And, sometimes it doesn't work.
Right.
Like you think it would.
BTK will tell you
Exactly
that.
what I was about to say. We know this from a lot of other killers, it just doesn't go like it should. It takes time. So more than likely he strangled her to the point that she passed out but she didn't actually die.
Right.
Thank God, because again, this is a 5-year-old girl.
Yeah. And just like all of the other victims, it's believed that Harvey stalked the mother for a few days or even weeks before he decided to do this.
So, 13 days later, and now this part, we just got done with a very serious, kind of emotional part, but this part is so ridiculous. 13 days later, police spot Harvey breaking into the house of Sam Calley.
Calley.
This is the fourth time, right? That we know of.
Yeah.
And they saw a man wearing black gloves approach the house and take the screen off the window. The person then breaks the window to enter the house. When Officer Brian Lewis, he approaches Harvey.
This officer is in the house.
Yeah, so he's in the house. Yeah. A shootout breaks out in the home. both Harvey and police would fire their weapons at each other, but no one was hit in the instant. And now this could be the gun that was stolen from the house in the first place. Didn't he steal a gun from this house, or was it?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So the gun that he's using could be the one stolen from the house, but a shootout does break out, and no one was actually hurt or hit, at least in the
Right.
incident.
I mean, you gotta think these guys are basically firing in pitch darkness.
Yeah, they're just fighting. Yeah, I mean, you could probably see each other, but your aim couldn't be that great.
Now, mind you, Denise Samcali and her husband are in the house as this is happening.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. That just must be the craziest thought ever. It's like, well, he's back, and now there's gunfire. I mean, I can't imagine just hearing this and being terrified because you don't know. Maybe this guy killed the police officer, you know?
Sure. So as Harvey tries to scramble out of the house as they're firing at each other, I think Harvey he dives through a window to be able to get out. Now, it isn't clear if this is the back window or another window, but basically in the process of this, he lacerates his hand and he cuts his hand up really bad from glass. But he's actually able to escape and he gets away from police. This is amazing. This guy somehow decides to evade the police every time and can't get caught.
And I can't really believe that. I mean,
It's hard to believe.
how does that happen, man? I mean, I guess anything can happen. But this is really when he is starting to show his true IQ. I mean, again, who knows what it was, but this guy, he goes back to this house a fourth time. I mean, what is happening here? You know, it's absolutely
This time with a gun.
Yeah, this time with a gun, which is, you know, probably a good way. You know, it's kind of how he escaped, I'm sure.
Yeah,
you know?
we'll go on and talk about this later, but this guy was also diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, and I think that starts to show because he can't really get Denise out of his head.
Yeah.
You know, she is the one that got away.
And so, do you want to talk about what he was doing the night before this?
Yeah. So no, the night of
Oh, the night of.
this
That's right. That's right.
occurrence. So the night of this shootout, earlier on in the night, Harvey Robinson is actually at a party with his girlfriend and his friends, and it's noted by everyone that he decides to leave the party early. I mean, just that fact alone really just amazes me. This guy was able to separate those two things so well.
I mean, earlier we talked about, you know, the fact that he was a 17-year-old boy. So he's going to parties like normal, man. He's
Right.
He's going, he's drinking, he's with his girlfriend, he's with his friends, he's at some house party, I'm sure, and then just leaves just so he can go do this. I mean,
Yeah.
so like you said, the OCD thing, the fact that he can't get Denise off of his mind, there's no way that didn't have some type of, you know, effect on him, that he was like, you know what? I mean, he had his girlfriend there. He had everyone there, and he had to leave to go do this.
Yeah, and he tells her, I think he gives her a kiss, and he says, you know, I'll talk to you soon, and he leaves. So as we mentioned earlier, during the shootout, as Harvey tried to escape, he had cut his hand really bad. Now, the next day, Harvey goes to the hospital to get some treatment for his hand, and lo and behold, at the hospital, Officer Brian Lewis actually identifies Robinson as the intruder. This guy catches him at the hospital. So he's, you know, he sees him, he's like, that's our guy. And I think he was actually notified by the hospital as well, because they were looking out for somebody with injuries consistent to this.
Yeah, no shit. That happens all the time. That's, you know, that's like if you get a bad injury after some major crime like this, you don't go to the hospital. I mean, I don't know what you do.
Right.
I guess if you're about to die, you go to the hospital. But other than that, I mean, you try to stay out of there, because this happens all the time. You know, this is something that people at hospitals look out for. They have information on. You know.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, he was cut. You know, he was covered in cuts and scrapes. But one big thing, one big piece of information, one big piece of evidence, it was found that Harvey had a giant bruised bite mark on his upper right arm, which was made, again, like we said before, from the altercation that Denise and he had in front of their house.
Right. So the evidence of that rape was basically still evident on his body.
Exactly.
You could see
And
it.
this didn't happen that long after that, and I'm sure the bite was very hard.
Oh,
And so,
yeah.
you ever been, I don't know, I've never been bitten that hard, I don't think, but I'm sure if you have it, the mark would stay there for a while.
So at this time, they pretty much caught him. They have him. They actually take blood and hair samples from him. Police get a search warrant, and then they find tons of clothes in his house, including a pair of shoes that actually were matched for the shoe print on Charlotte Schmoyer's face. And obviously, a lot of the blood they find on his clothes matches him to these crime scenes. I mean, there's no way he's getting out of this. They also stumble upon the 380 handgun we were talking about earlier that was taken from the Sam Cali home as well, tying him to there. So Harvey is interviewed by authorities on August 4th, 1993. Now, we're going to go over his charges here after he was interviewed, and this is pretty crazy. The list of charges brought against him. This is just for the Sam Cali case alone. He's charged with 3 counts of burglary, 2 counts of attempted homicide, rape, multiple counts of indecent assault, and 1 count of carrying a firearm without a license. That's just for the Sam Cali case.
Yeah, and for the murder of Charlotte Schmoyer, he was charged with criminal homicide, kidnapping, rape, aggravated indecent assault, and indecent assault. And again, the kidnapping was the fact that he took her off of the bike and left the bike there, took her off the bike and took her to the woods and killed her.
Yeah, and for both the murders of Joan Burkhart and Jessica Forney, Harvey is charged with criminal homicide, burglary, criminal trespass, rape, and aggravated indecent assault. So this guy has a slew of charges put against him. They really throw the book at him, obviously, as he deserves.
And they finally found this person that's been, terrorizing their town. So I'm sure the community at large is very happy that this guy has been found as well.
Yeah, definitely. This is the first serial killer in Allentown, Pennsylvania, period. He's the first. So the town had never experienced anything like this before.
Even this guy was so sloppy, he was still killing people, and it was still something that was so new to them, So Harvey's lawyers plead guilty in court on February 28th, 1994, for all of the charges related to the Sam Cali case, and is found guilty of all of his other charges later that year.
Yeah, and his trial, not surprisingly, is basically a short 14-day period, and they give him a sentencing. However, he didn't testify in his own trial. He told his lawyers, James Burke and Carmen Marinelli, quote, "I didn't do it," unquote. Amazing.
That's such a good defense. I didn't do it. And again, like you said, he didn't testify in his own trial, so he didn't say anything, when he was actually in court.
Right, yeah, he tells his lawyers, hey, I didn't do it. And no one's buying that. I mean, the evidence is stacked again. Like, what do you...
Of course, the lawyers are just like, okay, don't even talk.
Exactly.
We'll take control over this. And in court, he is said to be cold and show no sign of emotion, unlike his father, who, like we said earlier, showed, I don't know, it was probably fake, but showed tears.
Yeah.
Showed some type of emotion. Again,
right.
Probably fake, probably just a show, but still.
Totally. So Harvey is handed down 3 death sentences for each of the murders because of the brutality and the remorselessness that he showed in the courtroom. This guy couldn't be bothered by this. So he receives 40 to 80 years for the attempted homicide and rape of Denise Sam Cali, an additional 50 years for the rape and attempted murder of the 5-year-old girl, and he's sentenced at 19 years old.
So sentenced at 19 years old for 3 death sentences. I mean, is this during your research? Did you find anyone else that was younger than him to be sentenced to death? I mean, there definitely has been, you know.
Yeah, there may have been people younger who received it. However, it probably didn't go through.
No, and he, that's still, even if there were people that were younger than this, I mean, that's really young, man. 19 years.
17-year-old.
Yeah, 17 when he started, at 19, right, when he was sentenced.
Right.
So 19 years old and sentenced to death. You can't even. I don't know. I mean, he's so obviously messed up in the head. He probably wouldn't be able to take it in anyways. But at 19 years old, it's even harder, man.
Definitely. So we're going to go into a little bit of, after the sentence here, just things that had happened. So Robinson appeals in an attempt to slow the death sentencing that he received.
Of course, you see this every single time it happens.
Of course, they're playing the law at this point. But in 2001, judges basically vacate the Charles Smoyer death sentence, stating the trial judge gave improper jury instructions, and they change his death sentence to life in prison. It's just insane. So a death sentence is basically wiped from the account, at least one.
For basically technical reasons.
Right.
It said the judge gave improper jury instructions. What the fuck does that have anything to do, right? It doesn't have anything to do with, I don't know.
Yeah, and really,
he pleaded guilty to these things anyways.
Right.
Most of them. So it wasn't like they, I mean, he was found guilty of everything else. It wasn't like that would have changed anything. But it's just such a technicality BS thing that got a death sentence removed. It's pretty insane.
Right. Now, another crazy thing here, in 2005, the U.S. Supreme basically concluded that the death penalty for minors was unconstitutional, and because Harvey was 17 when he committed the murder of Joan Burkhart, basically his second death penalty conviction was changed to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So this guy had 2 death sentences completely wiped. Now, in 2012, funny enough, the U.S. Supreme Court rules that it's unconstitutional to sentence juveniles to a mandatory life in prison without parole. So the Supreme Court essentially says that juveniles at least need a chance to state their case and argue for why they should be released. This guy was never going to make it out of jail. I don't even know why he was trying, but he did.
It's just what you do, man. It's what everyone does, and it's one of those things where, like, I don't think that you and I will probably ever debate what, if a death, like being put to death, if execution is morally, sound or not. So everyone, you can kind of think about that, like what that's like. But now this kid who did all of these bad things is having all of his death sentences removed, basically,
Right. At least 2 of the 3, you know. Now, they couldn't do that for him for the murder of Jessica Jean Forney because he was...
Exactly.
He was of age at this time.
Exactly. Which is it's so insane to me. This is kind of a weird thing with laws. I mean, the fact that he turned 17 to 18, and that's why this death sentence gets to be put on.
Exactly.
It's like, how much did this person age in the months that he turned 18? Like, not to get too political or whatever. It's just It's just really weird that it's just so weird how that line is drawn, and like somehow just a few months makes up the difference between him keeping the death sentences and not. And what's really messed up about it is not just how, you might feel about this, but the fact that when he has death sentences removed, that actually hurts the families.
Definitely.
I mean, that hurts the families of the people that were murdered.
I think you're just giving light to and sort of shining light on the obvious line of bureaucracy that happened here that was unnecessary. But, however, in 2016, Harvey's defense team basically tries to put a case together, and at the very least, they try to lessen any sentence that he has. Now, Harvey's seen in court. He's in a wheelchair due to a back injury. His hair's long. He has glasses. He doesn't talk. And basically nothing really comes out of this. This guy isn't going anywhere. He'll never see the light of day.
Yeah, and really it's like, thank God, I guess, that he did commit that third murder. after he turned 18, because as far we're talking about this line that's drawn that kept this death sentence sustained, but at least it is, I guess. At least this third one, he'll probably never get, you know, he'll probably never have that taken out. But this is also, how old is he now? 40? Is he 44
He's
now?
47, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, how much time has gone past where you have to go through appeals and go through all this stuff that,
Right.
now that he's just fighting this entire thing.
Yeah,
It's sad.
well, during this the 2016 court appearance, the judge actually scolds the defense and says, like, why are you guys wasting our time? Like, nothing
Yeah.
is going to change. This guy did what he did. You're just wasting taxpayer money at this point. Like, just stop it.
Yeah, I mean, he's been on death row for how long now? It's like, what are you guys doing? Just let it go,
Right.
I don't know. But I mean, that's the way the law works,
Yeah.
That's what you do. That's why you see it so often, man. You see people fight because it's there.
Now we're getting towards the end of the episode here, but just to give you an idea of the setting of these murders and how small of an area this all really happened in, I just wanted to break this down for you. Now, from where Harvey lived, it was 4 blocks away from where Charlotte Schmoyer was taken, okay? It was 6 blocks away from the Sam Calley house. It was about 2 miles away from where Jessica Forney's house was, and 5 blocks away from where Joan Burkhart was killed. This guy was just killing people that were in this dense, or not dense, but it was in this little radius. He wasn't reaching out. He wasn't the DC snipers who were traveling across the country committing crimes and murders. This guy was stuck in this little area. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and it's something we mention. We always refer back to old cases or other cases or whatever, and we've done that with BTK a couple times in this episode. But that's what he did. I mean, he was in Wichita,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And he did that. He did the same thing. He broke into houses. Wichita's a much bigger city, obviously, than Allentown, but it's it's all in the same area. He would just go to this area and do this, and he did the exact same thing, but in a much closer parameter, and it was right down the street.
This guy's committing murders right down the street. I mean, he's basically murdering his neighbors 4 blocks away.
Exactly. So he converts to Islam while in prison.
Yeah, he converted while he's in there. I hope that helps him.
Yeah, something.
Yeah. And again, I can't really get away from the feeling of like his dad,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, his dad, like we said earlier in the beginning, he was very similar to his father. He took, just like a lot of boys do, a lot of young boys, they take after their fathers. And this, I really do believe that in this particular case, it turned out deadly.
Yeah.
I think that he was really doing a lot of the same things. He was acting out just like his father, and that's what he did.
What I hear from people a lot, when they talk about this always brings up the old philosophical argument of nature versus nurture. And I really think it's like, in this case, this is the best example. This is a gleaming example of how both things really aligned to create this monster. It was both. You could say he had a predisposition to be aggressive because of his dad, but at the same time, he was fostered by him as well.
Exactly. And so next week, we are talking about something I'm very, very excited for, something that I haven't heard anyone really talk about in a podcast, but it was such a freaking huge thing. I can't believe that no one has done this. Or, I mean, maybe someone has. I don't know every podcast, and I don't know a lot of podcasts. But next week, we are talking about the shooting of Dimebag Darrell and three other men in a nightclub.
Yeah, in Utah.
Yeah, in Utah.
I am. This case is really,
very
interesting
close.
to me. Yeah, it
This
hits
close.
home.
This case is very close. I mean, we'll talk about it next week, but I remember where I was at when I found out. You know, I
Yeah.
remember my mom being upset. I remember my parents being upset. All my friends. We're from Dallas. We live in we live in Dallas. At least we've both
Yeah.
lived in Dallas for a long time. And you know, Dimebag Darrell was the guitar player for Pantera. And my mom supposedly she had grown up around the area where they were before they were famous, and she had met them. And I had a friend who his dad was very close with Dimebag. They went to the funeral, and so this kind of affected us a lot too, because it was very local. It was this big thing. Although Pantera was a gigantic band, and Dimebag Darrell is a household name for people that are into metal.
Sure.
You know? So next week, very excited about that. Check it out. Again, if you enjoyed this episode, you finished it till the end, I congratulate you. I appreciate you being here.
Yes.
Send us an email at thestrangelandpodcast@gmail.com. We're thinking about starting up a Patreon maybe eventually. If you feel like if you feel like you would consider contributing, let us know. It'd be really good to know if we have any type of fan base. Like we said earlier, we are getting quite a bit of downloads recently. We're definitely ramping up. So I'm curious if anyone's listening to every episode. That would be great.
Yeah. We'd love your feedback, so let us know, guys.
Again, we release Tuesday nights, so check us out every week.
Appreciate you.
Good night.